Every year at the NHL draft, there are players that end up becoming steals. In 2016, Adam Fox went 66th overall in the third round, and in 2015, guys like Sebastian Aho and Rube Hintz went in the second round, and of course, Kirill Kaprizov, somewhat notably now, went in the fifth round. Today, I'm going to be predicting some guys that I think could be steals in the 2022 NHL draft. So be sure to stick around to the end of the video to find out what guys you should be looking out for on draft day. First player I'm going to talk about is one of my favorite players in the draft in Brad Lambert. Now, if you look up Brad Lambert and go to his Elite Prospects page, you'll find that this year in the Finnish Liga, he has a total of 10 points in 49 games played. Does that remind you of anybody? It reminds me of another Finnish player in last year's draft in Atu Ratu. Now, Ratu had just 6 points in 35 Liga games in his draft year, and he fell to 51st overall. This year in Liga, he was basically a point per game. A huge step up for him, and he's developed very well, but that could have been predicted based off of looking at how Ratu was actually playing. Sometimes players just get a little bit unlucky. Sometimes their team sucks. Sometimes their line mates suck. Sometimes it's just everything in the world is working against them and they're not putting up points that you would expect based off their level of play. I full-heartedly believe that that is what is going on with Brad Lambert this year. I think he is a much, much better player than what his numbers show, and I think he's going to fall in the draft because of this poor production. Is he going to go in the 50s like Ratu did? I kind of doubt it, but is he going to go top 10 like I think he should? I also doubt it. He could easily go 20 to 30 and then end up becoming one of the best players in this draft class. Next player I'm going to talk about is Matthew Savoy. Now, this might seem like a weird choice because he is a guy that is projected to go pretty high in the first round, but I see Savoy as perhaps, if not the biggest boomer bust player in this draft, then certainly top three. And if he hits, I think his upside is really potentially best player in the draft. It's just whether or not he hits. So if he misses, obviously he's not going to be a steal. He's probably going to be looked at as a poor pick. But if he hits and he goes, let's say he goes seventh overall and he hits and he becomes the best player in the draft, or say top two, well, that's a steal in my book. Third, I want to talk about Gleb Trikasov. Trikasov is a highly, highly offensively skilled player. What he can do with the puck on his stick in the offensive zone is unmatched by many players in this draft class. However, there are a couple of things that I think are holding him back from getting drafted really highly. First off, he is absolutely terrible on defense, and I think a lot of teams are going to be scared by that. Second off, I'm not sure how well known this guy is around the league. Obviously, there is a lot of hype around this guy online if you're really into NHL scouting online, but he does play in Omsk in Siberia, and there are certainly other Russian players that have had a lot more buzz, a lot more hype around them. Players like Daniil Yurov. The third thing that could hold Trikazov back from getting drafted as high as he should is just the fact that he's Russian. Quite frankly, there are a lot of question marks hanging over the heads of Russian players in this draft, And I don't know how NHL teams are going to approach Russian players. It could change from now and when the draft happens. Some things could change, and that changes people's attitudes towards it. Maybe it gets better, maybe it gets worse. I suspect that different teams are going to take different approaches, but really, who knows where this guy's going to go? Kirill Kaprizov went in the fifth round. Is Trikasov the next Kaprizov? I don't know. I think he could be. Does that mean he goes in the fifth round again? Maybe not. Maybe teams saw that Kaprizov went that low and they're like, okay, this guy's good. We should draft him higher. But there's so many things going on. It's really just a true wild card to me. Now, I have no doubt in my mind that Trikasov is a bona fide first round talent. He's top 10 for me. But I don't think, even in a best case scenario, I don't think there's any way Trikasov goes that high. And just by that nature, I think he will be a steal in this draft class for sure. Now, before I get further into this video, it is time for me to introduce today's sponsor, NordVPN. Just kidding, I have 45 subscribers. You really think I'd have a sponsorship? As if. But maybe someday, if you like this video and subscribe to my channel, I will have a sponsorship. Next, we have US NDTP defenseman Seamus Casey. Now, Casey is not a player that personally I am particularly high on, but I do have to admit, undersized defensemen are historically undervalued at the draft. Casey does have some really good analytics. If he can become a better skater, add more mobility to his game, add more quickness and speed, and he can translate his underlying offensive metrics into actual production and maintain that production as he plays higher levels of hockey, then he could be one of the best defensemen in this draft class, and he could easily go in the late first round. Another player I want to highlight is Russian winger Ivan Mirosh Nachenko. Mirosh Nachenko is a really good skater, and he has a really good shot, and he has size. But there are things that are holding him back from getting drafted as high as he ordinarily would go. First, again, he's Russian. There are those question marks hanging over Russian players right now. Second, he just had cancer, and apparently he is in remission now, which is great, but I am reasonably confident that a lot of teams are still going to take that into consideration when they're deciding whether or not they want to draft this guy. And for some teams, it is going to scare them away and he's going to fall a little bit. This is another guy who, if he had played the full year and he was healthy and perhaps not playing in Russia, I could see him going top 10. I doubt he's going to go that high. And again, he could be a really good top 6 forward in the NHL, and we could be looking back. Maybe he goes 40th. Who knows? Another player I want to talk about is Jagger Fergus. Now, he, to me, is a little bit like Matthew Savoy. He's a pretty small winger, but he is really good in the offensive zone. Now, I like Fergus's offense when he is away from the puck more than a guy like Savoy, but I don't like his offense with the puck as much. But really, he is another guy that I see as another boomer bust type player. If he can get a little stronger, resist pressure better, and really hit his ceiling, then he could be a really solid top six forward potentially in the NHL. But he's a guy that is projected to go late first round, early second round. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think he's rated pretty accurately. I do think he will go somewhere in that late first round, early second round range, but he has more upside than a lot of players in that range for me. So if he does hit, he could be maybe a top 10, top 15 guy from this draft class. Another player I want to highlight is Adam Sikora. Now, Sikora, I don't think has really high offensive upside, but he's really solid defensively already. And defending in the Slovakian League and the NHL are obviously not the same thing. But for a player of his age playing in a men's league who is as defensively responsible as he is already is a really good sign for me. I'm not convinced he's going to put up a ton of points at the NHL level either, but I could see him being one of those guys who is a super valuable, really solid defensive depth player on a good team. He reminds me a little bit of a guy like Barclay Goodrow, for example. A guy who can win face-offs, good on the penalty kill, defensively minded, and just a really solid all-around player who can chip in a little offense here and there. And I think to a contending team, players like that are super valuable. And maybe Sikora ends up being a guy who is constantly underrated throughout his career because he doesn't put up a lot of points. But personally, I could still see him being a steal, even if he doesn't put up crazy numbers, because of all the other little things that he does right. Now, it also helps that Sikora is not projected to go super high, perhaps a second, maybe even a third round player. So if you're getting a guy who has a long NHL career at all, after, 35, 36, if he goes, let's say he goes 52 and he plays, I don't know, let's say like 700 career games or something, to me, that is outperforming the draft position by a lot. And I think Sikora has a really, really good chance of doing that. Finally, I want to wrap up by talking about another US NDTP defenseman in Tyler Duke. Now, Tyler Duke is another guy that I'm not really that sold on. But, like Seamus Casey, he is another undersized defenseman. And as I mentioned with Casey, undersized defensemen are historically undervalued at the NHL draft. So even if I am not really that sold on Duke, there are plenty of professional scouts who have seen him play way more than I have, and I'm sure that wherever he gets drafted, he will provide good value. I mean, no prospect is ever a sure thing, especially undersized defensemen. But he's another guy who isn't projected to go very high, potentially anywhere from like second to fifth round, and he has upside. So if he hits, he could become a pretty good steal. I mean, if you draft Duke like 71st overall or something like that, somewhere in that range, and 5 years from now, he's like a third pair manning your second power play unit, and he has a decent career, then to me, again, that is vastly outperforming the draft position, therefore making him a steal.